Hello, everyone, and welcome to the sixth ever Highlight Haven interview. My name is Matthew Heiserman, and today we are joined by a very special guest. He's a broadcaster for the University of Yukon, as well as being the executive director of the Black Play-by-Play Fund. Let me welcome Adam Giardino to the show. It's great to have you on.
Matthew, thanks for having me. Let's get into it.
Of course, let's get right to it. You have spent over a decade doing play by play. You have a tons of experience in the field. You have broadcasted sports including basketball, football, baseball, hockey, and more. Can you explain why it's so important to be able to do play by play for various different sports?
It is something that I didn't even realize the versatility that I would be getting myself into in a good way. That when I graduated college in 2011, the infrastructure that exists now for ESPN Plus and basically every Division One school and a lot of non-D1 schools across the country, the expectation is that every single sport will be streamed. And for me back in 2011, the option was, okay, do you want to start the path in minor league baseball or minor league hockey, because there were so many teams, so many rungs to the ladder, junior hockey, that was sort of where you went. And that's not the case anymore. Fast forward 13 years from that decision. There are kids coming out of college now that can choose to go the college route. And so for me, it was baseball, but always knowing that with my experience as an undergrad at the University of Connecticut, that I really loved college athletics. My senior year at UConn was one with the women's basketball team having a 90-game win streak. I got to call 2 Final Fours on the men's side as well, including the Kemba Walker National Championship run in 2011. That year they had the Fiesta Bowl. That year the baseball team made the Super Regionals led by George Springer. So it was an incredible enticement to what college athletics could be. And so to get to the point of your question is that when I started my broadcasting career, I thought, okay, let's sink my teeth into baseball. But really, when I started expanding as a professional to college athletics and specifically within the Ivy League, that I live up in New England, and even though I broadcasted minor league baseball in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, that I would come back home in the baseball off season up to New England. And Brown and Harvard specifically, they cover a wide breadth of sports, that even to the point that this year for Harvard, they hosted the sailing national championships. And so I got to do 4 days of calling national titles on sailing, which I'd never even until this year thought of. Rugby, fencing, water polo, men's and women's swimming and diving, track and field, all these niche sports that, as we're recording this, it's the Olympics. So a lot of those sports are coming to the forefront and there needs to be broadcasters for it. But yeah, I just didn't recognize that versatility that I would need. And honestly, as we're recording this, my next game that I'm going to be doing is UConn field hockey. So just being able to, I wouldn't say that maybe rises to the strangeness to some folks as a fencing or a sailing, but field hockey, a team sport, but there are specific rules and terminology. And I love the fact that my career on the college side has been so versatile.
Yeah, and you mentioned those unique sports like fencing and sailing. Is it difficult to adjust to something that you haven't done play by play for really before?
It is, because I think as the play-by-play broadcaster who's calling a bunch of different sports, for me, I can sit down. I've done 1,500 baseball games in my life now, and I know the rules inside and out. I know the terminology that comes with repetition. But when you're doing a sailing, and I was lucky when I did those sailing national championships back in May, that I had 2 really, really impressive analysts to work alongside. And one of them was the first alternate a couple of years ago on the U.S. Olympic team. There's another one. The other analyst was a female, and she is currently a coach in Newport. She had extensive success in her college career. So to be able to rely on analysts like that was huge. But it's also recognizing that your audience, by and large, it's going to be friends and family and people that are in tune with that community. So with sailing, with fencing, it's just making sure that you as the play-by-play person are calling what you're seeing, and that you are not going too far out of your comfort zone to try and, take a stab at what something is when you're not the expert. So just stay true to what you know, stay to the research that you've done, rely on your analysts. And that to me is the challenge, is just going in there and not saying what you don't know, because if you do, your audience is going to find you out real quick. I mean, how many times have you watched a national TV broadcast of your favorite baseball team, basketball team, whatever it is, and as that fan in the back of your mind that, okay, these aren't the hometown broadcasters. They're swooping in for one game on a Sunday night, and they're not the experts that the guys that do the other 155 games a year on baseball, they're the experts. But for those handful of nationally televised games, the play-by-play people, they got to come in, they got to do the job, and they have to get up to speed because fan bases know this stuff more than you do. And that is especially true when it's friends and families of athletes.
Yeah, and out of all of those sports that you have broadcasted for, is there a favorite that you have in your opinion?
The line that I like to give is that with minor league baseball, it's 140 games in about
Mhm.
152 days back when I was doing it. Um, and college football is 12 games spread out over 13 or 14 weeks. So if you flipped that, if I only did 12 baseball games in 14 weeks and I had to call 140 college football games, I think my favorite sport would be baseball and not college football. But I think just because the scarcity of the inventory of college football, the excitement, the build up, the whole week is leading up to this one thing of who knows what's going to happen, especially the unpredictability of college football. For me, college football is my favorite just because you get 12 shots of it a year. And if you're lucky, you get a 13th with a bowl game and that's it. And then you got to put your feet up and wait 9 more months until you get to call it again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked about this with Michael Marcantonini the other day, but I would still love to hear your opinion on it. Why is it so important to have a variety of skills when broadcasting and show versatility in what you're able to do? For instance, you do play by play, but you can also write articles, do editing, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it is super important to be able to, especially early on in your career, market yourself in a bunch of different ways. That for me in the college landscape, the way that I was able to build myself up, I mentioned Brown University. Another school that I work for is Northeastern in Boston. And when you break in at those schools, and this is different when you're talking network TV or what have you, but for me, I was trying to build up schools that were around me. And so it's like, hey, I'm a broadcaster. I want to do X, Y, and Z, but I'm able to run the graphics machine. I'm able to run a camera. I'm able to do all of these other things for you. So when it came time to it, that if there was an extra game to be thrown at me from a play-by-play or color commentary perspective, I would get that shot just because I was the one that was helping run cameras, at other hockey games that I wasn't scheduled. I wasn't scheduled to call the hockey game, but I wanted to be around it. I wanted to contribute to the team. And I think that did go a long way for my bosses and saying, oh, okay, yeah, this person has these other skills. And if I didn't take all of that stuff seriously, maybe I would have been further down the pecking order at those schools to get on air. But because I was willing to show off my skill, do all these other things, that they thought, okay, well, he's multifaceted, so let's just let him be as big a part of this whole operation as he wants to be. And what that resulted in was me getting fast tracked to better games quicker because I was willing to help the team out in multiple ways.
Yeah, and you do a lot of broadcasting on camera, of course. When you do that, you need to look professional, coordinated. Do you have any tricks that you use for better on camera presence? If so, what are they?
Honestly, this was something that I was told, and I resisted it at first
Mm.
because, and this is somebody, Jason Benetti, who is a top tier play-by-play broadcaster. I think if he's not on everybody's top 10 list, he should be on your top 5 list. I mean, he is that good. And he is somebody that he's been a mentor of mine, and I've resisted a lot of the advice that he has given me. And, he's always proven to be correct. And what he told me when I was building up because minor league baseball was mostly, almost exclusively radio. And so I'm saying, all right, how do I get better on camera? I want to get better on camera quicker. And he was just like, man, you got an iPad, you got an iPhone, just flip it around and record yourself. And do that, put your phone, it's not selfie mode. Don't hold your phone out because that's not how you are on camera, but hit the record button, flip the camera around and treat that like your camera lens and just do stand-ups. And I can't say enough how that translates to putting in the work when nobody's watching. It's like a baseball player going into the batting cage. When you're in a game, you don't get bonus points for how long you're in the batting cage. You get the bonus points because you put in the work and your skills are better. And so, when you're standing in your bedroom, an empty bedroom, and you're doing stand-ups into an iPad that no one's ever going to see, but you're practicing, and then you watch it back and you go, I don't like, it's subtle stuff. It's, I didn't like how my eyes looked there. I squinted when I didn't really need to, or my mouth twitched and, the corner of my mouth went up when I said a word. And, I kind of liked that. It showed that I was interested. I was curious about what was being said. All these little facial things that actors and actresses, they know, they do. This is the kind of work that actors and actresses do. They're on camera all the time. And so to get better and more proficient at being on camera, which, Matthew, when in the grand scheme of things, you're on camera for 30 seconds before the game, maybe 15 seconds at halftime, and that's it. So you got a 2-hour broadcast, and maybe you're on camera for 45 seconds. So it is a drop in the bucket of what your total presentation is going to be, but it is a far larger, it is just a far larger metric that folks will grade you on. That when someone turns on a broadcast, if you're watching a national TV basketball game and the person just looks uncomfortable in the first 30 seconds, that might throw you off for the rest of the broadcast. So being in command, comfortable for those first 30 seconds of the game, that's going to set the audience on the right track. And that is why it's given really big importance, even though it is so infinitesimally small, given the length of time that you're actually on TV, even if it's not on camera.
Yeah, and you mentioned how it's so important at that beginning. And I think that sometimes you can paint a picture of someone based on what you see right at the start. And then that's how you think of someone for the rest of the game when you hear them.
Yeah. First impressions, huge. And it is. And,
Yeah.
it's something, again, Jason Benetti is someone that has a physical disability. So he's always spoken to me, especially about how when he is on camera, he knows that he is not going to, no matter how much he nails the language, the speech, the vocalization, that he is going to look differently than other broadcasters. And so that's why doing the work behind the scenes for him to get better was so important, because it's like, all right, how do I get this trust? Because you've got an hour and 59 minutes of needing to build this trust, but you want to hit it as quickly as possible at the top of the broadcast.
Yeah. And there is a question that I like to commonly ask, and the answers usually differ. It's all about perspective. What's the most difficult part of doing play by play?
The most difficult part of doing play-by-play is not making assumptions, especially when you've seen a play 1,000 times before, that all of a sudden the ground ball behind the bag gets through Buckner's legs and Vin Scully isn't already starting the Boston Red Sox are about to win the World Series, right? I mean, like, that is just staying in the moment, saying what you see. And obviously that's not a perfect example of game scenario, but that's the general idea of like, hey, this is, yeah, it's a ground ball up the middle. It's not, ground ball up the middle, the shortstop, it gets through his legs. It's no, ground ball up the middle. You don't start talking about the shortstop making the play until the shortstop has made the play. That is so critical. Play-by-play is always present tense. It is not past tense. It is not future tense. And so making sure that your brain is in that moment and not looking ahead and not looking behind, that is, to me, the hardest. But the best part of play-by-play is that it is unscripted, and that, a lot of studio shows, it's scripted, but not word for word, but you have a roadmap of how things are going to go. Live sporting event starts, you got no idea. And that's the beauty of strapping in and doing play-by-play, is that this thing can head in any direction at any moment, and you're the one that just needs to be on your toes and not making assumptions and just living in that moment.
Yeah, and you talked about this a little bit earlier. You were able to cover that 2011 UConn March Madness championship team with players such as Jeremy Lambs, Shabazz Napier, and most importantly, cardiac Kemba Walker. What was it like being able to cover those games?
That is truly special and surreal. I love being asked about this. So selfishly, thank you for asking me. And it was surreal in the sense that for me, you asked what's my favorite sport to call, and it's college football. But what sport am I the biggest fan of? It is college basketball. I love March Madness. I love college basketball. Um, I love that there are 350 teams that are involved in this thing, and not, college football is 120 something teams, 130 teams, and really only a couple have a chance at having a meaningful stake in what the national championship looks like.
Mm.
I think that when I look back on that run, the surreal part of it is a that UConn finished ninth in the Big East that year, that they were the first team to win 5 games in 5 days in the history of college basketball. It had never been done. It's been done once since. And just the special nature of a team that ascended so quickly by winning the Maui Invitational earlier that year with zero expectations, that they suddenly were a top 5 team and then trailed off despite having the National Player of the Year on their roster. I mean, with all apologies to Jimmer Fredette, that Kemba Walker should have been the National Player of the Year that year. And I think that the surreal part of it from a broadcasting perspective is that I knew in my mind as a sports fan that I would never at 21 years old get to call something so awesome again, that it was 11 games in 23 days. It included the step back jumper at the Garden. I was one of 4 people to call that. There were the professional radio for Pitt, UConn. There was the ESPN broadcast, and then there was UConn student radio. That I'm one of 4 people that has a call of that moment, that as a college basketball fan, that I could match it. And, our God willing that over the next couple of years, my role with UConn could expand, that the guys who are currently doing men's basketball, that when they move on, that I'll get to slide into their roles and have a chance to do this thing with Dan Hurley leading the way. But at 21 years old, I knew that I was doing something that I would not eclipse in my professional career. That it's like, okay, I'm 21 and I've got 40 to 50 more years of doing this awesome thing in a career, but enjoy this now, because calling a men's basketball national championship is something that so few people get to do. And it was incredible. I'm so thankful to my journalism professors that as a second semester senior, that they understood what those 3 to 4 weeks really meant for me generally, and didn't hold my feet to the fire with the academic part of it, that what I was doing as a broadcaster was just as important as what they were trying to teach me in the final weeks of my academic career. So there's a lot that I think back on in that run. I know it's a little bit of a winding answer, so if there's more specifics that I can dive into, please let me know. But it is something that to my dying day will be forever a top broadcasting moment, even though it was getting to do it as a student.
Yeah, and UConn has won 2 national championships in a row now with basketball. With that success, they did lose some guys to the NBA. Those players include Stephon Castle, Tristan Newton, Donovan Clingan, Cam Spencer, etc. Do you see them going for the three-peat this upcoming season?
Boy, can't put anything past Dan Hurley now. The guy passed up what was supposed to be a larger contract, wound up being about a $70 million contract with the Los Angeles Lakers. And it's having gotten to know him just from being around the UConn program these last few years, everything that he says in interviews is true, that he loves molding college athletes. He loves the buy-in that he gets from these guys. And it's different than a college football coach. You think about a Nick Saban, a Dabo Sweeney, where they are running a full, not even a small business. They're running a medium-sized business with 100 people on, 100 athletes that they're working with, coaching staff in the 20s. Like it is incredible for Dan Hurley. It's fewer than 20 people are in this between staff and players. And so having that sort of microscopic control is something that he relishes. Obviously, at the NBA level, we know that the buy-in from players on the defensive end isn't always going to be there every night, that these are 100 millionaires that are worried about just keeping themselves healthy, and versus college kids that are looking to become 100 millionaires. And he's an ultimate motivator. And all of that is to say, boy, you can't count out UConn, even though, yeah, there are going to be some holes, but there were some holes when Jordan Hawkins, Andre Jackson, and Adama Sanogo left the year before. So, I mean, they've got a great transfer coming over from St. Mary's at the 2 guard position. They've got Hassan Diarra returning as the Big East 6th man of the year. They've just got these unique pieces. Alex Karaban is going to be on the short list of, first team All-American preseason. He's going to be in the discussion as a guy that I think could go for 20 points a game. It's not in his nature. He's more of a distributor. He's more of a role player type, but he's also someone that got great feedback at the NBA Combine, and he's a huge piece to get back as he passed up on the draft. And so Karaban's going to be taking opportunities to earn that first round money himself. Yeah, I can't wait. Just can't wait to see what this is all going to look like. And they've got a guy in Liam McNeely who was a late addition to this program. And I think talking with UConn fans, they know that he was added. They don't maybe know how good he might be. And, Stephon Castle was at his best when the NCAA tournament rolled around. And if that's what UConn gets out of McNeely, that suddenly this guy is knocking down half of his threes by the time March hits the calendar, things are going to look really interesting for UConn, especially the way that Dan Hurley can dial up the intensity in those big games.
Yeah, and I believe McNeely was ranked top 20 heading into college, so there's going to be a lot of potential there.
Yeah, and even looking at, I tend to, when I look at mock drafts, I tend to lean towards NBADraft.net. But, it's like, okay, so this guy is going to be good, and they've got McNeely as a first-round pick. And so, I just think that it's like, all right, so what is this? And I think we're going to find out real soon what it is, because he's probably going to be the first guy off the bench. He's going to, that's the benefit of having these veterans in front of him. And they're not going to need everything out of him right away. But boy, if he can become a first-round pick by the time his freshman year is over and start playing like that, that is some really good depth to have.
Yeah, and you were talking about Dan Hurley. Of course, the Lakers ended up signing J.J. Redick as their coach, and Shams and Woj had 2 contradicting messages that basically said who the Lakers were going to sign when that was all going down. Did you think that Dan Hurley was going to leave, or did you have him staying the entire time?
Hindsight's a beautiful thing. He stayed, so it's easy for me to say, yeah, of course he's going to stay. I do think there is maybe more truth to me saying, yeah, I thought he was going to stay, maybe more than an outsider. Now, if that number is 90 million, which is kind of in the rumor mill of where things were, and UConn could do 50 and the Lakers were doing 90, I mean, I don't know how you make up $40 million in there. Again, this is coming from someone who's not made $1 million in his life, but it's like, all right, so these numbers are all beyond any comprehension. But for Dan Hurley, and I don't want that word to sound like a bad thing, but control. And he loves control. And not in a bad way, not in a dictatorial type iron fist way. It's just a guy that would lose sleep and get physically ill in an NBA situation where the guys weren't trying in every single possession. That's what he expects. That's what he wants. That's what he needs. And so I do think the time will come that the New York Knicks job will open up, and Dan Hurley, the next time that happens, will be top of the list. It won't be a big geographical change for him and his wife. It'll be closer to home, in fact, for him. And that'll probably be the thing that takes him away from UConn. But again, if I knew the number from the Lakers was 70 million and UConn was 50, and you told everybody that right from the jump, I'd have said there's a better chance than not that he stays at UConn. Just that's who he is. That is the type of ship that he loves to run. And fortunately, the rumors were false about how much the Lakers were offering him, because if it was closer to 90 or 100 million, I think he probably takes the money and just tries to figure it out. But fortunately and selfishly for the University of Connecticut, Dan Hurley's still around.
Yeah, and now I just want to talk a little bit about college sports as a whole. Two big topics for a while have been NIL deals and the transfer portal. I'd love if you could touch on both these categories and give your opinion, starting with the NIL deal.
Yeah, NIL is something that still needs to be ironed out. And I guess that's going to be my answer for the transfer portal too. The NIL, I was just talking with a coach from a non-revenue sport at UConn yesterday, 2 days ago. And he was talking about how he can't reconcile the fact that this money that he's going out and doing fundraisers and saying, hey, we need this amount of money and come on, donate it to the program. And, this is somebody who raised quite a bit of capital for a brand new, beautiful facility for their sport. And athletes for years and years forward will get to reap the benefit of that fundraising, those donations, and that incredible generosity from UConn alums and folks in the community. Now throw $1 million at a quarterback in the transfer portal, and that is a one-time infusion of money. And I don't know, outside of, I don't know, oil barons in Texas, how this will be sustainable. It'll sort itself out, but I think that we are in the Wild West times of NIL and people basically entering the transfer portal as free agents. Kansas State brought in a decent piece this offseason, but for $2 million in basketball. I think that's going to be a wake-up moment to say, okay, what are we doing? Because Kansas State is putting, if it's $2 million for that, they probably, I don't know, $2 to $4 million in transfers this year. Do they have that every year? Where are they coming up with $2 to $4 million every year to sustain their basketball program? So those are all the questions that I have. And that this NIL stuff, as it's drawn up, athletes, you should be able to sell a Donovan Clingan jersey at the UConn bookstore, and Donovan should make, I don't know, whatever, 50%, whatever the number is, because it's his name on the back of the jersey that someone wants. Great. That's awesome. I will fight that fight for these athletes for the next 100 years. But it's all the other stuff that is maybe not in the spirit of what NIL was or was hoped to be, that I think where it'll sort of, it will resolve. It won't look like it will this year. And I certainly hope it settles back in the way of maybe not spending so much money on what has turned into almost free agency, which dovetails lovely into transfer portal. It's another thing that I think it's wise to say, I don't know. And it's okay to say you don't know to things sometimes. And, just thinking of UConn soccer, that there is a women's soccer player who had to sit out all of last year because started her career at one school, got homesick, never played for that program, then played at another school and is now at UConn. And the NCAA said, well, you had played at two schools, you need to sit out a year. And the argument is, no, I didn't. I went to a school, didn't like the culture and the environment there, and I left without ever playing for the team. So there are still pieces of the transfer portal that flummox me, especially with COVID years almost finally being exhausted. I think that piece of it being removed, where all these athletes got an extra year, that'll help kind of calm the waters of all of this stuff. Because it's just, I think once we're back to athletes having 4 years and we can kind of operate from that starting point, that'll be a whole lot better. And maybe athletes not jumping around as much, knowing that they don't have a fifth grad year automatically baked into this equation. That's not a given. And for a lot of these athletes in the last few years since the pandemic, they've looked at it and said, okay, let's look at this as a 5-year process. So where do I want to be in 5 years, not 4 years? Because, these athletes, whatever it is, 2% of them go professional in sports and 98 do something else. So all these athletes have had an opportunity to go get a free grad degree somewhere, which is awesome. But it certainly doesn't make the new rules of the transfer portal any easier as things are trying to get sorted out.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think it's really difficult for smaller schools because, of course, they do good scouting, they get the good players, and then the players immediately leave. Now, is that fair for the players wanting to go to a bigger school? Completely. I think it's kind of just 50-50. Fair in some ways. I do think players overuse it sometimes in other ways. But I mean, it's really just a toss up depending on what angle you look at it from.
Well, it's interesting because, for instance, I'm thinking in the recent past, John Morant, Murray State. He was a sophomore when he exploded. And, it's like, okay, what if the transfer portal was what it was when he was around in college? Would a bigger school have gone after him? Would he have turned into John Morant? Was it this perfect situation at Murray State? Or Steph Curry played out his entire career at Davidson, where his brother Seth Curry got to transfer to Duke. Because it's just an interesting, what could have been if the situation was different. But then again, I'm thinking with college basketball specifically, there's so many leagues in Europe right now where if you're a junior and you're sitting on the bench at I don't know, whatever D1 college, and you think, I bet I could transfer to Florida Gulf Coast and be an okay scorer there, but make $1 million now overseas, I think that'd be huge.
Yeah, and another thing you talked about a little bit briefly earlier is how there are so many schools in college basketball, but it's much more limited in college football. And that includes the playoffs, where college football just went from 4 teams to 12 teams. Do you think that was a good change?
Love it. Absolutely love it. I love March Madness because of the underdog. So being able to get that group of 6 team in there every year, getting I don't even know if it's called group of 6 anymore, because whatever non-power conference alignment is absurd right now. But basically, yes, I want to see a team or two that a typical fan might scratch their head and go, who? I haven't been paying attention to college football this year. All right, let me see him play Georgia in the first, or wouldn't be Georgia, but let me see the 5 versus 12 game in that first round. Let's make it happen. I want to see that. I loved Boise State when it happened way back when against Oklahoma. And I think college football especially needs more of the Davids and less of the Goliaths.
Yeah, and just a couple more questions before we wrap things up. Is there anyone that you found as an inspiration while getting into the broadcasting industry?
Not one. As I mentioned, his name, Jason Benetti, has been a huge mentor of mine. His career is just on this meteoric path. I think that as a broadcaster, if you watch a broadcast of a game, you can find one thing from every broadcast that you watch that you can incorporate into yours. And I think that's huge, because then you're not becoming a carbon copy or a poor, replication of this one person. You're really pulling things that you like from a wide swath of broadcasters. And so for me, that's always been important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, final question. If there was one piece of advice you could give to an aspiring broadcaster like me, what would that be?
Do the work when cameras are off. Athletes watch film. Athletes put extra work in the cage, the weight room, whatever it is. And if you take that mentality to this as a craft, you're going to get a lot better, a lot faster than you would otherwise. And yeah, I think that when you look and you see a Noah Eagle in his early 20s, you see a Mike Monaco around 30 years old getting to do all this great stuff on ESPN, Wimbledon, NHL, Stanley Cup playoffs, all this stuff. Guys are talented, no doubt, but it's because they are really good and efficient at spending their time getting better at the craft. And that to me, above all else, is so huge. And part of that work is reading books. Don't read, read the sports section, read all that stuff, but read stuff that's not sports. You'll expand your vocabulary, sentence structure, syntax, all that stuff that will make you a more interesting orator. And I think that has been a real key to making myself a different broadcaster than maybe most other people.
Yeah, and with that being said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really do appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say to the people watching before we wrap things up?
Absolutely. Much appreciated. You can follow me on Twitter, X, at Adam Giardino. The name's on your screen there, Adam, Giardino. Can't wait to hop on with you again at some point, Matthew.
Absolutely. Again, big thanks to Adam Giardino for being the 6th ever Highlight Haven guest, and we'll see you next time.